Hey guys, this is Dave again with Valor Fire Training, and we are here for our next episode of Q&A with Lex Shady. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So Lex is a firefighter paramedic in Bell Fountain, Ohio, and you've been there for how long?
Just about 2 years.
Awesome. Okay. And so those of you who don't know Lex, she is kind of the building construction upcoming guru, right?
I don't know about that, but I like
I've
talking
read,
to things.
I've read some of your stuff and looked at some of your posts. I think they're, you're right in there with everybody, right?
Yeah, I like talking old buildings. That's for sure.
For sure. Yeah. So if you check out her page, she's got a lot of information on old building construction and definitely some stuff that I've never seen before. It's stuff that I look at and I'm like, holy crap. I mean, there's just, you have a knack for finding stuff that you wouldn't normally see if you just walked right by it. So it's very, very, very cool.
Thanks.
So we have a couple questions that came my way, and you were the first person that I thought of when I read them. The first one is from Kate here in Kansas, and she asked, what was your biggest struggle as a female firefighter, and how did you overcome it, or how have you tried to overcome it if it's something that is still going on? And the second question is from Todd in Illinois, and he asked, what type of building construction scares you the most in the fire service? So which one do you want to start with? We'll let you pick.
I like the second one because I think
Okay.
that's easier. So I wouldn't say, I guess probably like legacy type 3 construction probably scares me the most. And I don't want to say it scares me for like me personally and what we see, but it scares me in the aspect of it's talked about so little anymore. We focus on the modern construction, there's all the talk about the big type 5 apartment buildings that are going up. And like we've seen multiple of those complexes catch on fire, but we're not really talking about Main Street anymore. And there's so much to those buildings that you don't get to hit on in the fire academy because there's just not enough time. I don't know how it is out there, but out here in Ohio, your basic fire academy, it's like 6 hours, maybe 8 hours of building construction, and they have to cover everything.
Right.
So there's such a short amount of time to talk about that legacy construction. There's all the different types of collapse. There's the inherent and acquired voids that are in it, cock lofts, all that, rain roofs that are in there, all that stuff that new firefighters don't really know. I mean, I didn't know a lot of it, and I had zero background in construction. So when I started, I'd walk into a building or we'd be driving around on Main Street and I would be like, that looks weird, but I don't know what this is. Or, you go into a fire and you're like, okay, well, everybody says that the building's going to come down on me or out from underneath me, but why?
Right.
And I didn't get that. And so that's what scares me, I think, is that I know that, I'm still newer firefighter. So I know the curriculum that's coming through and what people are being taught. And I know how little is focused on that. So I just think that unless we start talking about it more, which is why I like to talk about it, I think that it's kind of a hazard for us. And that's what makes me nervous, I think, is just, like I said, how little it's talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so, when I came up in the fire service starting out, we did, I don't even know if we did 6 hours, to be honest with you, of building construction. Like we talked about the different types.
Right.
And we had a general idea of it. But you're right. I mean, as we've progressed in the fire service, the kind of hot topic item is, the I-beams and the concrete with foam, I think ICF construction.
Yes, I believe so.
And there's all these like hot button items. And so we're moving forward, which is good because those are new hazards, but we're not talking about the stuff from 1950, 1960, 1970.
It's like legacy construction is over here. Like, oh, it's old. It's going to stand. This lightweight stuff's what's scary. I'm like, yeah, the lightweight stuff's going to burn fast, but we know about that now. We've talked it to death. We know when you look at this building, like there's a bunch of hazards. It's going to burn faster and it's going to come down faster. But this old building, like the fire is going to spread in places you're not going to see it. There's going to be collapses in places you didn't think was going to happen. What to look for. And you're like, oh, brick building, that wall's not going to come down. Well, okay, hey, look at that giant crack underneath the window. Like right. That's a big sign. But most people look at that like, oh, the building's just old.
Or
that's a hazard.
Yeah, or you get the new firefighters walking around and they're like, why are there a bunch of those metal stars on the side of the building? And I'm like, there's 8 of them. That's not good.
Like, you see a bunch of stars surrounding a window, like, that's your sign, kid. Like, that window might not stay there very long. Like, yes, it's just, and that's the stuff that, like, you don't have time for, in your academy classes. And so I'm really lucky. I have a really good group of friends and instructors that are fantastic, way smarter than I am. My senior guys are fantastic. So when I started, I would drive around my district and look at buildings, and I would go back and ask them questions about it. I would take pictures, and I still do this now. I'll go to different cities or whatever, or even in my own still, and I take a bunch of pictures, and then I go back and look at them later, and I try to find the weird stuff in them, the stuff that I didn't notice when I was driving around, or the stuff that I may not know what it is. And then I go ask someone about it, and I learn about it. And that's how I learned, because I needed to connect what I was reading about in the books, because the books are great, but sometimes they're up here, and when you don't know anything, like, you can read it and still not understand it.
Sure.
So you actually have to get in your building. I tell these people all the time, you want to learn about building construction, you have to go in the building. And I think until like we get this younger generation of firefighters in those buildings, like actually not look at the book, not do the Zoom thing, this is fantastic, but you actually have to take what you learn here and go into the building with a mask on right now and learn about it. And I think until we do that, like, that's what makes me nervous for building construction.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up a really good point. And this was something that happened to me. I actually used to live in a town called Tonganoxie, Kansas. So
that's an awesome name.
It's super phonetical. It's very easy to spell and it's very easy to say, but people were like, Tonganoxie. I'm like, oh, come on. It's not that hard. But, it was a town of like 5,000 people. It's right in between Kansas City and Lawrence. And they had a main street strip. And I remember going and doing a walkthrough of one of the buildings. And I asked the guy who owned the building, I said, hey, what's behind this door? And he's like, well, I don't know. And so we opened it, and it was literally a hallway that went all the way down the entire block to all the different buildings. And nobody knew that it was there. And it's like, God, if there was a fire in the basement, we're going to be fighting it in building A, and all of a sudden building C is going to catch on fire.
You'd have no idea why.
And we'd have no idea why, because it was running down that hallway. And we're like, oh man,
That's awesome. Yeah. It's stuff like that like you're just not going to know. We had one, we wouldn't have known this had the ceiling tile not been popped, but it had a drop ceiling. And for whatever reason, one of the tiles was popped out of it. And you looked up and I'm like, that's a column that's just chopped off. Like a support column that was through the building. They had taken like one building and broke it down into two businesses. And there was a support column that was just like, there was only like 2 feet left of it. I'm like, holy, like, that's something that we need to know. Like you absolutely have compromised the integrity of this building now, because all the weight that column was holding is now on the other columns, and they weren't designed for that.
Right.
Just like simple stuff like that like, yours, you wouldn't have never guessed that if you hadn't walked through there. Like, you would have no idea.
No. And I always wonder, and I never asked anybody because, I was still young and new. And so I was like, I'm not going to call anybody out, but I wondered, how many people had walked through that building and never opened up that door.
Right.
And there was probably an inch of dust on the doorknob. Like, it had not been touched.
Awesome.
And so I'm just like, how many years has this been here? But so your district makeup, like, are you kind of, what's your percentage of like new construction versus old construction?
So we have one station, we cover our whole city. We're a really small department. Cover the whole city. I would say it's probably 85 to 90% like legacy type construction, houses included. Our new construction that's going up is there's a lot of new houses, I guess. There's a couple factories, but most of it's that older construction. We have a very large like Main Street, like historic district.
Right.
That it's interesting because it's the legacy construction that's being rehabbed. So about 10 years ago, a guy came in and started buying up the businesses, and he's rehabbing them and completely redoing them. He's completely changed the town. I mean, the town was losing people, losing money, whatever, and now it's going the opposite way. It's one of the best like small towns in Ohio. But with that, he's bringing new construction into those old construction. So that's why like we try to go out into these buildings. He's rehabbing a restaurant now, and he tore up a level of floor, and there was like the old terrazzo floors underneath it. Like, we didn't know that because there was flooring on top of it. So it's stuff like that we're trying to get out and just look and see what's there. And then also noticing like a couple buildings that he's taken one building and broken into two. So you have what you would, if you didn't know, you have a wall in between, you think maybe it's a firewall. Well, it's just a drywalled wall that he split one business into two. So it's stuff like that is also really important to get in downtown. But yeah, like I said, we have some lightweight construction, new buildings going up, some new condos. There's a new set of the wood framed apartment buildings going up on the edge of town. So we're getting those. But
God bless them.
Yeah, we love those. Ours are only 3 stories though, so it's hopefully not too bad. And they're pretty well like done with them, so we haven't had to worry about the big fire during the construction process, knock on wood, yet. But so yeah, I mean, like, there's all of that, but a lot of it's that legacy construction, the legacy houses. Oh, the city's really old, so there's a lot of houses, early 1900s kind of thing. So
Sure. Now, do you guys in Ohio, do you guys have like a state mandate as far as the building markings? Because I know like some areas, and we do not do this here in the Kansas City area, on the Kansas side, but like the building, if it has, a bowstring truss, it's going to have a marker on the building so that everybody knows that it has a bowstring truss. If it's, do you guys do markers like that?
well, some cities do. I am not a fire inspector yet. I would love to take that class because I think it'll teach me a lot, but I have not taken that yet. So if it is statewide, my city doesn't follow it, put it that way. I don't think it is. I know there are some cities that do it. Toledo being one, I know that they mark some of their buildings. A lot of the ones that I know they mark are more like if there's holes in the floor, like a no-go entry.
Right.
But I'm not sure on like the trusses type thing. I think that's a fantastic idea. I've seen it, traveling. The different buildings are marked with the different kinds of, like you said, signs or symbols or whatever. But I have not. They're not in my city if it's a state thing. So
yeah, and I've always been an advocate for that. I know on my volunteer department that's more rural, if it's a no-go, if it's a vacant, unoccupied, I mean, however you want to, I'm not going to get into semantics, but because there's always people living in them, trust me.
Yes.
But if it is a derelict house, we will mark it so that we know. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to go search it. It's just more of a like,
You're
hey,
just prepared. We have a list in like the AC's office that has some of those houses that we know that like are going to be a more hazard to enter for one reason or another. So we kind of try to keep track of that. But yeah, like you said, like even if it's empty, it's not necessarily empty, but we just like to know ahead of time. So
yeah.
but yeah,
And
I would like to see the marking start going up. I mean, I think that would, if nothing else, I don't think it would really maybe necessarily change people's tactics, but it would give them a second to stop and be like, okay, like this is what I'm going into, and maybe possibly change what their original game plan was, but just another reminder. And I like anything that makes you slow down on the fireground. And I know people are gonna be like, oh my God, what? But I don't mean like slow down your like
it's like a cardinal sin.
Right, like move with a purpose, right? But like take a second as you get off the truck and like look at your building or look at the fire, whatever it is. Sometimes I think we go running in full bore and maybe that's when people get hurt. So that's all I mean by that is just take a second to think.
Well, and I think too, like I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day about technology and how, we use emergency reporting. And it's one of those things where when we look at how we do building construction and we look at our pre-plans, we load them in there, but they're not like right up there. They're not right ready to go because we don't want necessarily everybody looking at the thing right now.
Right.
And when they get on scene, they can take a second to look at the building, figure out the pre-plan, and make a tactical decision without it clouding their judgment. Because I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody driving down the road in the front seat of the fire truck doing this with the pre-plan. And it's like, dude, stop. Just don't do that. Yeah. When we get there, let's figure out what's going on, and then we can get an idea of kind of where it is and what's going on.
Exactly. Yeah. And like we use Active 911 for our runs or whatever. And like we haven't fully like utilized every capability because there's so many capabilities in there, but like you can put that kind of information in of a building, if there's a certain kind of truss, you can have that in there, or, if that there's holes in the floor of a structure or whatever, like we can utilize these technologies to give us a heads up, before we get there, if we take the time to do it, basically.
Yeah. And so it's so funny that you bring up Active 911. So we just brought on in my career department, we just brought on a part-time inspector, and that's because we used to do it on shift. Mm-hmm. We do the walkthroughs and the inspections, and now he does the walkthroughs. And we're like, okay, you go do the weird stuff where like you're measuring the diameter of all the stuff and the wiring, right. And we're going to go walk over and look at the inventory.
Yeah. And you sit here and do the test, like the 2-hour whatever test, that you do that part. We're just going to look around.
Yeah. And it's really been great because it frees up so much more time for us to walk through the building and look and see what it is. But yeah, we marked, like if there's certain sides of the building where there's large quantities of gases, we'll mark that on the pin that drops on the building. So it's not necessarily like a 3-dimensional floor plan.
Right.
But we know on that back Bravo Charlie corner, there's 16 pallets of gas,
That's a really good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just another reminder.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, well, I just don't want to stand by the wall. Like that's my biggest thing is if it's really burning, I know I don't want to be over there.
Right. Avoid this corner.
So as far as, so that's like the residential stuff. And I agree with you as far as the, you know, downtown Main Street type thing. So what has been your like worst experience as far as residential? Like, have you gotten into some situations where the fire was just running and you couldn't get a hold of it and you didn't know why?
Um, trying to think of so we've had some where it's gotten into, it was in a bedroom and it got into like the wall between the bedroom and like the master bathroom, and it got into that wet wall. That was an instance that, like, at the time, like looking back on that fire now, I know that that's where that went and that's why it spread up the wall. At the time I didn't know, you know, like how it got from the first floor to the second. Another one would have been, there was a fire. It was a really, really small fire on the first floor. Someone was using like a kerosene heater in their house in the wintertime, like they always do. And it's, it was right next to a cardboard box. It spread up the cardboard box, but it was also next to what you would have been an old chimney. And so
Okay.
it spread up that, and it skipped the second floor and then kind of got in the attic space by going up the chimney. So
Okay.
again, like, you know, it makes common sense now, but like at the time I was really new, trying to figure out like, how did this get from here to up there through, you know, you connect the void now knowing things, but that was a couple. But my most, I guess, like, I don't want to call it scary fire, but like eye-opening fire experience was actually one of my very first fires on my volunteer department. We were mutual aid on a structure fire. It was just a residential single story, but it had a full basement. Unfamiliar territory to us. The house was on a hill and had a walkout basement.
So it's
We did
like a
not know this.
three-story
So
theoretically.
it was just the basement and then the first story. So it was just
Okay.
those two basically, but the basement was walkout, and it had a full door to the basement. Well, I was assigned search, and the host team went in and then down the stairs because no one did a 360. So I was on search, and the fire had spread from the basement up through just the floor, basically up into the kitchen, and basically the whole back wall of the kitchen was on fire. Well, I was brand new, and it was just, there was a whole lot of like miscommunication between multiple departments. We found the fire with a hole in the floor. We didn't have a hose line. So it was just kind of one of those, that was a fire to me that like reminded me to just take a step back and like think. And that's one of those fires that, you know, eventually as I work my way through the fire service, if I ever find myself in charge, which I want to be a firefighter right now for a very long time, so this is way down in the future, but like, you know, the importance of like doing your 360s and the importance of communication, and, you know, if you're going to send a team in to search that first floor, like maybe consider bringing your second line in with them also, like that kind of thing. Like, and, you know, no, understanding your building construction in that one would have been important too, because now it was at night, but, you know, if we would have paid attention to other buildings on that block,
Mhm.
all of them had walkout basements.
Sure.
So, you know, if we had noticed that as we were going, you know, safe to assume that that one would have too, advanced your line to the rear kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, other than that, we've had some pretty good fires, but I started studying building construction so quickly that there hasn't been a ton since my very first early ones that I wasn't able to, maybe not at the time, but very quickly after, kind of figure out why, or ask questions of like, you know,
Right.
why this, or like, why did you, like, I would ask my senior guy, like, why did you go open that spot of the wall over there? Like, what made you think to do that? And I just starting that so early helped, but I did it because I realized how little I knew. And
Right.
I think sometimes people are afraid to ask questions where I'll look like an idiot. I don't care. Like, I
That's
want to know the information. So if I look like an idiot, great. I'm not an idiot at the end of this conversation. So
well, and I think, you know, when we look at the culture of the fire service right now, I think we're slowly, and I'm maybe going to jump ahead of myself a little bit. I think we're starting to get over that. Like, I think we're getting over slowly the, you know, you're new, sit in the corner, shut up.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, there's still places that do that, but I think that people are a lot more open to, you know, like you said, why did you open up the wall over there? Or, hey, what are you thinking when you're doing these things? And it's refreshing to see that we're getting out of that, because I came into the fire service with the sit in the corner and shut up for the first 10 years,
right.
and I'm like, well, how the hell am I supposed to learn anything if I can't ask questions?
Well, like my department, we're small. Like we can't afford to do that. Like there's six of us on a shift in a day. So if we took the new guy and was like, sit in the corner for 10 years, don't talk, like that's one to possibly two of your six people that you're just expecting to like sit over here and like they have to go to work. Like when we have a fire, like all 6 of us have to go to work. We have to know what's going on. So we can't afford to like just push somebody in a corner and be like, yeah, you'll figure it out eventually, kid. Like that doesn't work. Now I'm not saying that, we're super busy and going to jobs every day, because I wish that was the case, but it's not. But that's why even more so important for us to, and like they do a great job of it. Like if I want to ask a question, they will take the time to like, okay, we're going to walk back through this again, and we're going to point out the things, that, you did right, or that maybe you missed, or maybe that, maybe they missed, you know what I mean? So like they do a really good job, but we don't have a choice,
Right.
which is a good thing, for us. But like you said, I agree. Like, I think the fire service is being more accepting of like learning. And I don't know if that's because they realize that, the younger generation doesn't know anything, or, if it's just a change in culture or what. I don't know. I don't care. I think it's great. And I think that it's the only way we're all going to get better. If we have to be able to, but the older guys have to be willing to learn from the younger guys too. And my department, like I said, like we have some great like senior guys and some great older people that they absolutely are. Like they're not going to go to these conferences, but when us younger people go, they're like, tell us what you learned, and let's, see what works for us. And I absolutely love that.
Yeah. Well, and you were telling your story and I started chuckling. I was trying not to laugh out loud because I didn't want you to think I was laughing at you, but it made me think of kind of my first, oh shit, fire. As far as building construction. So I was a lieutenant, and we had a basement fire. It came out as basement fire when we pulled up. We had these kind of bay windows down in the basement. So it didn't quite look right, because just the building construction layout, I was like, man, I know that's a California split, but it just doesn't look right. And so we got to the top of the stairwell, and we did a quick primary on the first floor. We kind of crawled up the stairs and searched the first 2 bedrooms, but it was really high heat because obviously it's a chimney.
Right.
And so we're sitting at the top of the stairs, and we tried like 3 or 4 times to get down to the basement, and we couldn't. And so finally I called out and I said, hey, I called command and I said, I need you guys to hit the fire from the outside. And he's like, well, we can't hit it from the outside. You guys are in the stairwell. I'm like, I know, I need you to hit it from the outside. And he's like, okay, I just want to confirm you want us to hit it from the outside. And this is like, we were on VHF, very close proximity. And I'm like, hit the fucking fire from outside. It's really, really hot right now, and I need you to put water on it. And so they did, and we got a good knock on it. But when we made it down to the basement, like, it didn't do anything. It didn't change the fire. And I'm like, what is it? Just nothing was making sense. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I'm calling for ventilation, and they're like, where do you want to vent? I'm like, vent at the top of the stairs on the 2nd floor, find out where they are. And I want you to vent right there to let all that heat out. And in the process, I found this door. And when I opened it up, I took about 2 steps forward, and it went down. And I'm like, wait, I'm already in the basement. So what is this? And I crawled down, and it was like another 1.5 story sub basement in this residential house.
Is that common out there?
No. And so I'm like, what is this? But that's where the fire was. And then as soon as I started coming down the stairs, the dude behind me had the tick, and he's like, dude, come back. It's on fire. You're like going into the fire. I was like, what? And then I noticed that it was, red and orange. And so we backed out, we hit it. It was fine. Like, we got the fire knocked down because that was where the seat was. But I had no idea that this was essentially a 2.5 story basement. And it was so if I remember the story right, the guy had a sub basement, and then he actually dug down further and turned it into like a workshop area.
Okay.
And so it was like crazy. And I wish, yeah, but I mean, again, it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, I've never seen anything like that. And when I came back out, I talked to some of the senior dudes, and I said, I have no idea what that was. And they're like, oh, you've never seen that? That's like a, whatever split. And I'm like, no, I've never heard of that. And so they kind of educated me. Right. And then they're like, oh, by the way, why the hell did you cut a hole at the top of the stairs on a basement fire? And I'm like, well, I did it because of this and this and this. And they're like, okay. So we were teaching each other at the same time.
That's awesome. And I like that. I love that. It makes me sad when I hear like different people working up in different departments when they don't discuss fires after. I'm like, how do you learn anything from it? Like if your shift or whoever was there, at bare minimum, if your truck doesn't discuss it, like you're not learning anything. So the next fire is going to go exactly the same as this one did. So I think that's awesome you guys discuss it, because we do the same thing. We'll do it on scene, and then we'll do it again later. And then like obviously everybody talks about every fire for a couple of days because they're excited because they had a fire. So
yeah, somebody had a fire in the last like 6 months.
Right, you gotta like hash it to death. But like I think that's how you learn, and I absolutely love that. In my department, is like let us use helmet cameras now, and like it's for our use only, but it's still, it's great because like you watch that footage and you're like, holy cow, what in the world was I doing? Or like, oh, I didn't notice that before, I need to pay more attention and look for this, like I missed that last time. And I just think like that's another form of technology that's a great tool to use. And if departments and individuals use it smartly, like you can learn a lot from it.
Yeah. And I've been saying I'm probably going to get butchered for this anyway, but I've been saying this for a long time. Like if we're going to sit around as a fire service culture, if we're going to sit around the kitchen table and blow smoke up each other's butts and tell all these tall tales of all these amazing fires and grabs that we ran, we should be just as willing to sit down and talk about the things that we didn't do right and the things that we messed up. And I've never, just like you, been shy about like, hey, this is what I didn't do right, this is what I screwed up on, I wish I would have known this, or I wish I would have done that differently. And I feel like it's just as important to tell those stories. In addition, I mean, everybody likes a good, like, oh, I found the fire and it was, I saved 6 babies. Everybody loves those stories, but we should be talking about the stuff that we didn't do right too.
Right, because the story of where you save the 6 babies or you pull grandma out of the basement, like that's not the story someone learned something from. The story someone learned something from is like, hey, I was like swinging my axe and like I completely, missed and I, almost hurt the guy next to me, or like, you know what I mean? Like it's just something like that. Or like I went upstairs and I didn't realize when I went in that it was a half story and I opened the wall without a hose line and oh look, there was a fire going on the void. You know what I mean? Like it's those stories that like teach the other people. They're like, oh, like wait, you said a half story. What does that mean? Can you explain that to me? Yeah. And like, oh yeah, the knee walls and the fire's running through the fire could run through the voids there. And like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, if we don't tell the story about how, and I don't know how many times I've heard guys say like they went into a half story, they opened the wall without a line. They're like, Lex, don't do that. But if they didn't say like, hey, I almost got burned and I had to run back down the hallway, like I would.
You're like, oh, he's just trying to keep me from having fun.
Right. Yeah. I was like, so that they put the background behind the story. I'm like, okay, now this all makes sense now. And like, you're absolutely right. I think people need to be willing to own up to when they mess up, because it's the only way you're going to get better. So, and that's what we all say we want to do, right? Is get better.
Yeah, we say we want to. It's whether we're going to.
Right.
So, okay. So, I'll ask you one question about building construction, then I want to get on to that next question if you're cool with that.
Yeah.
So right now with the, lumber, wooden construction apartment buildings, I know here in Kansas City, we have had at least one major fire that caught like a whole entire neighborhood on fire. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I think they had 23 simultaneous structure fires at the same exact time.
Yeah, I'd say that's a bad day.
Yeah, like it was horrible. It was the Royal Place, I think it was Royal Place in Overland Park. High winds. They were doing hot work on the apartment without a sprinkler system, and so we've seen it like time and time again. So, what's your thoughts on that and that type of construction and how we keep seeing the same type of fire over and over again throughout the country? What do you think it's going to take to fix that?
A lot of that, I mean, I'm not going to say all of them, but a majority of those fires that are happening during the construction process before the point where the sprinkler system's installed. It's like, how do you prevent that? Like you got to get better, get better construction workers. You have to be on them more to be more considerate, maybe potentially have them have some, we have some construction guys that will, not necessarily working on those buildings, that they come borrow, like we have hose and hose lines. I don't know what they're doing with it, but is this something where we get the construction guys to have that stuff on hand so that if there is a fire, they can get a knock on it before the fire department gets there? I mean, there's a whole other set of hazards. You're putting civilians in charge of fighting a fire, but
right.
Like that's a whole other thing. But I don't know what the answer to that is, because honestly, like I said, the one that just happened in was it Virginia last year, yep. Like the Alexandria area, that was during the construction process.
Ours was, yeah.
I believe in that one, and I don't quote me on this because I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the sprinklers were installed but not connected or something like that. So like, you get more vigilant people, like don't smoke in a construction site that's made of wood. Like, I mean, yeah. I don't know that there's an answer to that, because that's just human error at that point, right? Like now, if this was something where the building was completely constructed, people were living in it and they were catching on fire right and left, that'd be different. Yeah. That would clearly be some kind of code, or we would need more sprinklers, or we would need to change the construction, but that's not happening. Those buildings are coming up, and once they're up, with the sprinklers in place, with the drywall, like you might have an apartment kitchen fire, but those for the most part, those buildings aren't just burning to the ground. It's
Right.
purely in the construction process. And I think at that point, it's not really on the fire industry. It's probably more on the construction industry than anything. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to still keep seeing those until they change something. What they could change, I don't know, but
I don't either. And for the people watching, like if there's because we all have 19 different jobs. I'm sure that there's some people that are doing construction. Like I just don't know if we're putting the cart before the horse. Like, is there a way that they could not do the hot work
right.
until they get the sprinkler system put in and activated? Because
Yeah.
in all these cases, that would have at least saved part or all of the building.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see like we're going to build these buildings and then we're going to put on we're going to activate the sprinkler from building A and building B, and then we're going to finish constructing C, D, E, and F. So even if you do have a fire, it's still going to save part of the building. But I don't know.
And I don't know enough about construction. I know like the building's built, but like the process of doing it, I don't know enough about. So, when they're doing hot work, with the simple aspect of having the guy doing the work and a supervisor watching, for, kind of like a fire watch type thing, like, would that make a difference? Maybe. I don't know. Most of these fires are happening during the day while they're actively working. So possibly, I would think at least if they had some kind of water can or something on site to get a knockdown on stuff and then bring the fire department in to double check, I would assume that would make a difference. But once they start, they just start going so fast because there's no drywall up or anything.
It's just open.
It's just wood and it's open. So, and they're, like we said, there's no sprinklers, so they just take off. And I really think it's got to be on that industry, in my opinion, unless I'm missing something. It's got to be on that industry to change something in their process to make our jobs easier.
Yeah. And and there have been some historically where, it's kind of in an uninhabited area. And so, it sucks for the person that's building that building,
Right.
Or the investment group that's funding that building. But, especially like the one in Virginia, the one here in Kansas City, we're talking 22 homes that were burned and people's stuff that got ruined because of that process. And so, it's after the first couple, I was like, well, surely they're going to do something about that. And then after the last like 4, I'm like,
and I think fire departments need to learn from each other in this aspect. Like right now, we know that this is going to keep happening until something changes and keep happening. So I think on the districts that are getting these buildings, like my city, it's our responsibility to study the ones that have happened and, call up another chief and be like, okay, what did you learn from this? And like, I talked to a friend that works in one department and she said exposure protection, Lex. She's like, let that building burn, protect the exposure. She's like, that's what we learned. Because a lot of them will start off trying to fight that fire and the fire needs to go out eventually, but if there's buildings around it, like protect those. And then the next companies are coming in to put that fire out. And I think as long as departments are learning, we're not going to prevent that building from burning down, but maybe we can prevent those 23 others from catching on fire or at least get them stopped, before they lose the whole building.
Sure.
So,
yeah. And I think, there was another one and I couldn't even tell you which one it was. I just remember talking to someone about, it was like a 2-story, it was smaller,
right.
But it was in a district where they didn't have a good water supply established yet. And that department didn't routinely do drafting operations. And so because they didn't routinely call for mutual aid, it was a city department. They didn't really ever have a need for it.
Mm-hmm.
When that happened, they're like, oh, so we need water. Where do we get that from? And they're like, we'll call the surrounding departments. They're volunteer. They'll bring in their trucks and they have tankers and they can set up porta tanks. And like, they didn't have communications set up. It was a train wreck.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, if you have that building going up in your district, like maybe set up a mutual aid agreement for that building until it's built so that that's your plan.
Yeah. Well, and like you also have to think about too, like even if you have a water supply established already, depending on how big that building that's going in is, like you're going to need another one, right? Like depending on what area of your city, how well your hydrants are, like I know where ours is. If that whole thing caught on fire, like we would have to have a shuttle to bring in more water in from somewhere else to supply our aerial. And, we would probably bring a mutual aid aerial in. So, we would have to have another water supply. So having all that coordinated would.
How many hydrants can you hook up off the same main?
Let's count these. Well, they actually put in, I'm not going to quote this exactly, but they had to put in another line off the main for these buildings. So like making sure that I would say that that would be absolutely my department's job. I wish the city does the testing for us, but if your city doesn't, if you're getting this up and you're getting new hydrants in, okay, that building's not done yet, but it's even more important right now to make sure that that hydrant's in and working,
Sure.
because we know that. So that's another thing that departments can be proactive in, is making sure that their, water supply in the area is adequate in case that catches on fire, so that they're not scrambling around with new hydrants not working, new building on fire, having
Yeah.
to do just like that. So I think the more proactive we can be, and I think sometimes in ways, I think we worry too much about these buildings, but then I think we worry too much about them once they're done. I don't necessarily think we worry enough about them while they're going up.
Right.
So,
Yeah. It's an afterthought. It's an
mhm.
absolute afterthought. Okay, good. So that second question.
So what have I experienced the most? Remind me again, something about being a female, the hardest thing I've experienced, correct?
Yep. So she wants to know, what has been your biggest struggle as a female firefighter, and how have you overcome it, or have you tried to overcome it if it's still something you're dealing with?
So I'll answer this in two ways. One, just in general, like physical strength is probably a big one. And then that's not just for females, that can be for smaller guys too. But physical strength is a really big one that I am still doing. So I want to keep up with and or be better than other people on my shift. And that's not a girl thing. That's because I'm competitive. So, but just in the way genetics and life and whatever works, like females have to work harder to be able to lift, the same or more than the guys. So that's a big one that I'm always working on. I lift a lot, go to the gym a lot. My shift works out together, so we're really competitive and, just kind of supportive of each other of that. So that's one. The other one is honestly the biggest hurdle I had in the fire service was from other females, which may or may not be surprising to some people, but I have an opinion of, I don't care that I'm a female in the fire service. Like, I would much rather not talk about the fact that I'm a female in the fire service. I just want to be a firefighter or a fireman, whatever term you want to use. I like firemen. I like the tradition. Some people don't like it. But other females in the fire service, some, not all, like to recognize that they're a female. And I want to be like everybody else. Like, I don't want it to be like, hey guys, and Lex. I just want to be like, hey guys, right?
Right.
And I got some pushback, I think, from other females on that, because they said like, hey, we had our first engine crew of all females. And I'm like, okay, like, I don't care. Like,
Right.
Did you earn that spot? You did? Fantastic. Congratulations. But I don't care that you're a group of females. And so you have to be willing to understand that not everybody's going to like you or agree with your opinion. But you also have to be respectful, right? So I like the word fireman, and there's a lot of females in the fire service that do not like it. If you don't want to be called a fireman, I will not call you a fireman. I will call you a firefighter, but I'm going to call myself a fireman. Like, that's kind of how, so, I'm still experiencing that. There are lots of supportive females, like, holy cow, I have a great group of friends, but there are also other ones that they just, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's, some people say it's because there's not very many, so they're competitive about it. I don't know, but in all honesty, I'm still working on it today. That the biggest struggle I've had is with other females in the fire service, right or wrong. I don't know, but
Sure. Well, and I think that that's one of those unique things, and like, I'm a male on this side of the discussion, right?
Right.
So like, I'm
awkward conversation.
Yeah, like, I'm going to be super, super, super careful. But no, like, when I had
both, it's fine.
Right. Well, when I had, when I started out in the fire service, I grew up around female firefighters. And so to me, it wasn't really, I didn't care. And I don't think anybody else around me, at least, cared whether they were male, female, whatever. And one of the firefighters, her name was Rita Makovica, and she actually passed away off duty. She had gone to bed and never woke up again. But the last time I talked to her was at Station 1, and we were kind of just BSing out in the bay, and she was, working out, and she was just one of the crew, and like, nobody cared whether it was male, female. And so that's kind of the environment that I grew up in. And so as I've gone up in the fire service, and as I become a company officer, I've always told people, like, I don't care if you're a female, a male, a transvestite. I don't care. Like, it does not matter to me. And so I love your standpoint of like, I'm competitive, and you hit the nail on the head, and I loved it. You're like, I wanted to be better than everybody else, but it's not because I'm a girl. It's because I want to kick their ass.
Right.
Like,
I just want to be better. I am super competitive, and so like it's nothing to do with like, oh, the girls got to catch up with the boys. Like, no, like I just want to be the best one there. Like I'm sorry. I don't know. I mean, and I feel like I have a right to say that I don't care if I'm, like, I don't want to be known as the female. And I think I have a right to say that because I am the first female and the only female currently still on my department. So when I got hired in, God bless them, but they were terrified of me because there are some, you hear the only thing you hear about females in the fire service is either, they were all of them on a truck or someone sued someone, right? Like there's never just like, hey, look at this instructor. It's always got to have the word female in front of it and usually something bad because that's what hits the news, right? Is something bad, unfortunately. Sure. And so they were terrified of me that they would look at me wrong or say the wrong thing or whatever, and that I would sue them. So it was like, hey guys in Lex, or like, hey, we have to do this because there's a girl here now. It's like, we got to be super careful, guys. And honestly, for those first couple of shifts, it was so awkward. Like, everyone was just on edge and like not really like, no one was joking around. And like, I was new, and this was my first full time. I've been on a volunteer department, and like I like grew up with those guys. So like they treated me like any other one, right? So I was used to joking around and whatever. And like I walk in this firehouse and everyone's like staring at me like, what do we say to her or whatever? And I was just like, I was just like, I don't know how to fix this. Like, I'm just like you guys, like just treat me like everybody else. And sounds really dumb, but we had a rescue Randy that we were putting gear on. We got a new one, so we were switching them out. We were putting gear on. One of the guys was taking a boot and like shoving the foot in or whatever. And he said something like, just shove it in there. And I said, that's what she said. And they all just turned and looked at me. And I was like, what? And they just continued staring at me. And I was like, guys, if I'm offended, I'll tell you.
Right.
Honestly, just be normal. And after that, like, then everybody's like slowly okay, like she's fine. Like I'm not going to say it. And I even like had a conversation with my chief. I'm like, honestly, chief, like, you're making me feel more excluded by saying like, hey guys and Lex, or like, hey gentlemen and lady, like just say, hey, good morning. Like, yeah, you don't have to single me out. I promise you, if I get offended by something someone says, I will handle it myself. Like, you don't have, I'm not going to sue you for looking at me wrong or saying the wrong thing. And so like, I just want to be like everybody else. I just want to be a firefighter. Like, that's all I want. Just be a firefighter. I don't want to be the girl firefighter. I just want to be a firefighter. And I think, honestly, I 100% can't even wrap my mind around what some of the first female firefighters went through, because I know it sucked. And I know that there are some places that it still sucks. But that's not everywhere. That's not the norm. And in my opinion, the more we talk about it, the more we validate it. The more we talk about how females are, treated crappy in the fire service. Yes, it happens. It's not everywhere. It's not everyone's story. We need to try to move forward with it. Let's talk about the good stuff that's happening. You know what I mean? Like, let's talk about the younger generation of firefighters coming in. Let's not separate them into gender or race, whatever. Let's just talk about the new generation, or let's talk about the new officers that are being promoted. Like, who cares if there's a new female chief? Let's talk about, what she did to get her there, not that she's a girl, right? And I think, in my opinion, sometimes when we say like female chief promoted, we're taking away from all the work she did over all those years and focusing on the fact that she's a female. She worked her butt off to get there. Let's talk about all that. And that's what I think, it just kind of drives me nuts. Like, I want to take the gender out of it, and I just want to focus on the work you're doing.
Sure. Well, and it was so funny that you mentioned that, because I was reading a promotional, like, hey, congratulations to Chief so-and-so, first female, whatever, I think it was like first female battalion chief. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as I started reading it, it was like they listed out every single qualification, every committee that she was on, everything that she did for the department. And it was, you've been such a valued member of our organization and blah, blah. And I was like, thank you for putting into words everything that they've done to be a benefit to the department, not just congratulations because you're a female. And like you said, we have right now 3-4 female firefighters on our department. And on the volunteer side, we have, multiple females on our departments. But our full-time career department had a female who was adamant that she didn't want special treatment. And I remember that the same day that we kind of started talking about this new mandate that the chief put in place, that the captain had to sleep in the back communal bunk room and that the female firefighter had to go sleep in the captain's office by themselves. And she was like, this is bullshit. She's like, I don't want to sleep in the room by myself. I want to be back there with the crew. And we're like, then sleep back there with the crew. Like, okay, that's fine, whatever. And so she did. And I was like, man, our chief is going to lose his mind. And she's laying there. And all of a sudden it was like, I'm looking around. I'm like, okay, who let it out? Like, who did that? Because that is horrible. And over in the corner, there's this little mouse voice. And she's like, excuse me. Like, oh my God. Like, we had to get up. We had to leave. Like, it was the most horrible fart ever.
Oh my God.
But she's like, listen, she's like, everybody farts. She's like, you don't fart? That's bullshit. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But she did. She had a really, really long discussion with the chief. And she was like, I refuse to sleep in the captain's office. I feel like you're treating me differently because I'm a female and I don't want that.
Yep.
And it was great. And I love the fact that she took that standpoint. And if you know, there's a female who is okay with that, then that's fine. That's on them. Mm-hmm. But like you said, I think that when we sit there and it's all about, okay, well, we have to change our sleeping arrangements just because the female is going to be in the station that day, it just puts more of a focus on it mm-hmm. than maybe they even want, you know?
Yeah. And like, I don't see, some people, you know, talk about like the privacy issue or whatever. And like, absolutely provide a bathroom with a lock, whatever. But yep. If you're in my opinion, like if you're walking into a station and expecting a private bedroom because you're a girl, like you have to know what you're going into. It's a communal area where everybody sleeps. Not there. A lot of new stations have private bedrooms or whatever, but like you're sleeping. What else do you I mean? If there's something else going on in the firehouse bunk room other than sleeping or playing a prank on someone, there's something more inappropriate.
Yeah.
You know, like that's something totally different. But if you're just sleeping, like, what do they think the military does when they're deployed? Like, yeah, they have their own separate bunks, but sometimes, you know, same gender sleep in the same room. It happens. Yeah. Like my department, we have a communal bunk room, and they hung up curtains at the end of every bed. And even that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing that they did this for me. And the guys were like, actually, no, we like it. We have a privacy.
Yeah, they're like, we've been asking for this for years.
And they did. They literally said, like, we've wanted privacy to change, you know, like in the morning, because we change when we get to work. We don't wear our uniforms in. So like, they're like, we've wanted this for years. Like, we are happy. And it's hilarious because my shift doesn't even sleep upstairs. We all sleep downstairs in the recliners. But
right.
Like, so like they, you know, they do that different stuff. And like some of that stuff, like the guys appreciate too. But like I said, it just, at first it made me uncomfortable. It was another one of those things of like, oh crap, they changed something for me again. Like, you know, if you need to change because your gear's too big or they're not giving you right size gloves or boots, like that's a totally different subject, right? But like the little station changes like that, like if you're okay with it, like, you know, you want to sleep in the other room, that's fine. But I don't think you can expect and or demand it, because you just have to know where you're working. Yes, there should be privacy, and that privacy includes like a bathroom, place to change, whatever. But I don't necessarily, in my opinion, think a private sleeping area qualifies as that, because you're not guaranteed you're going to be sleeping anyways. So,
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not going to lie. I really, really, really enjoy having a separate bunk room. Like, right. Just if I want to go crash and then I don't have people coming in and out and turning the lights on and doing all that crap, like I can just go into my room, pass out and just fall asleep. But I've also grown up around, you know, communal bunk rooms, and that's just how it is. And, you know, you try to be quiet, you try to keep the red light on at night so that you're not waking everybody up. And, but yeah, and I think too, you know, like you had mentioned the bad stuff that happens and the focus on the bad stuff. And I think so often from a male's perspective, at least for me, like I look at some of that stuff that I see in the news or hear about, and I'm like, what the hell are they thinking? Like, that's just dumb. Like anybody that's going to do something like that, I don't want in my department. I don't want in the fire service, because that's not what we're about. And so I hope at least that, you know, that's the common goal of everyone, is that we got to weed out the pieces of crap.
But those people are everywhere too, though. Right. It's not just the fire service. And I think the fire service gets more attention because we're public servants, right? Like our job is to serve the community. So when someone does something completely stupid to a female or male, you know, like, because bad stuff happens in males too, it gets attention. But that stuff's happening in an office place too. It's just not talked about. Like, honestly, so I worked in an office before I started, and the sexism that happened in that office was 10 times worse than the sexism that happens at the firehouse. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times my old boss would say, Lex, you can come to lunch with us, but you have to be quiet because the men are going to be talking. And he wasn't kidding.
Right.
And like that stuff happened in the firehouse now, you know, I would have some words to say, right? Like, so it happens everywhere. And I think we forget that, and we just try to make the fire service out to be this like women hater thing. And again, not everywhere, it's the minority, but like that's not how it is. And I think we just need to let's talk about training, you know, let's talk about like what individuals are doing to make themselves better. Let's talk about fires, you know, building construction, and like why are we so focused on gender? I can't wrap my mind around it still. Like I've had this conversation, I wrote an article about my opinions on it, and
Yes, you did.
Yes, like I said, I'll be opinionated on this for enough for the both of us. It's fine. So I don't know, like it just shocks me that it's still such a big, I was not something that when I joined the fire service, it honestly surprised me how much it was going to be talked about.
Yeah.
Maybe that was naive on my part, but I was surprised.
Yeah. And I think too, you know, like when Kate sent me that message and she said, you know, like, hey, can you find a female, somebody who is a female in the fire service who has dealt with something, and, you know, maybe I can get their perspective. And so, again, I think as far as my inner circle, you know, we don't look at race, we don't look at sex, we don't look at any of those things. We're like, okay, whatever, you know, if you're a firefighter and you can do the job, that's great. And so I have definitely pointed fellow peers who are female to other females so that they can talk and kind of compare notes. And, you know, there's been some situations where, you know, I know like my wife had an issue with me sleeping in the same room for years. I mean, this isn't new to the career department.
Right.
This is ever since I became a paramedic. She's like, you have to sleep in the same room as a girl. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, you guys don't sleep in the same bed, do you? I'm like, do you seriously think no.
See, and like the TV shows ruin things too, because they make it out to look so much worse than it actually is.
I know. And so, you know, like I had a female firefighter who came to me. She was one of my subordinates on the volunteer side. And she said, like, my husband has an issue with me being at the station with you guys a lot. And, you know, I'm taking time away from my family, but I'm also around a bunch of dudes. Mm-hmm. And she was like, you know, can you give me some pointers? And I was like, no. I was like, but I can point you in the right direction. And I can, you know, we talked about it. But I said, like, I think you need to talk to another female firefighter to kind of get their perspective. Because, like, I can tell you as a husband, I probably would think the same thing. Like, if my wife went to work and was around dudes all day long and only dudes, I'd be like, how does that work? You know? So I would have those same questions. But I said, like, you know, let's kind of get you in touch. And so we have a neighboring department that also has females. And so I was like, hey, you know, Joanne, can you come over here and talk to this person? She's like, yeah. So
like I've had stuff happen, you know, like I've luckily never had anything major happen, but like I've had minor instances come up, like everyone does. And I think if you handle yourself professionally, and I always try to handle myself first. So like I'll talk to the person and be like, you know, whatever you said or did, you know, offended me, or maybe it was inappropriate, and, you know, here's why. And, you know, do it that way first, and just approach them not as like, I'm a girl and what you said hurt my feelings, but like as an individual, as a human, what you said or did was not acceptable. And here's why. And like, okay, I did not set that boundary with you before. I'm setting that boundary now, you know, and if you cross it again, and then you take it to your officer. But I think, you know, as long as you try to, there's jokes in the firehouse and there's disrespectful, right? And everybody knows where those lines are. They may, you know, pretend like they're blurred, but you know where those lines are. And as long as you act yourself appropriately, and like I said, you just try to handle it professionally, I think you're going to have less of an issue. I think if you know, turn something minor into something major by screaming and yelling at someone, like no matter if it's a guy with a guy about somebody said something about their wife, like, you know, like that's only going to escalate it, right? So just try to be professional, just talk with them, get a good group of females in the fire service to talk to, because like you said, like there's just some things like you guys are not going to understand. And I think there are some female groups out there that I think have lost their focus of what they're there for. And there are some out there that absolutely are there to be like, you know, oh my gosh, dealing with guys all day long is so frustrating. How do you guys do it? You know, or how do you talk to your husbands about it, or explain it to your kids? And I think if you surround yourself with people like that, like, you know, it'll, you know, just make things better. But you also just have to understand, like, you guys have to learn what it's like to work with a girl, or girls, and girls have to learn what it's like to work with guys. But again, that's the workforce everywhere. I mean, we're
Yeah,
not,
it's not unique to the fire service.
no, we're not back in like, 1950, 1960 when females were hardly in the workforce period.
Yeah.
Like you got to get used to it now. Like we're all working together. It's how it's going to be moving forward. So let's all just be firefighters, firemen, whatever word you want, and let's go fight fire.
Well, and listen, one of the best conversations that I've ever had in a multicultural, it was truly like a multicultural, multi-gender shift. I mean, we couldn't have been more diverse. And I think that there were like 3 or 4 arguments about politics. There was like 4 or 5 arguments about what we were going to have for dinner. And at one point, like, I'm out back and I'm talking to somebody, and one of the dudes comes out and he was like, "No, you need to listen to me. You don't talk to me like that." And I was like, who pissed this guy off? Like, this guy never gets mad. And this girl who was on our shift comes out and she's like, "First off, you can't talk to me like that because I'm the new firefighter, just because you don't like how I am." And I was like, and literally like 5 minutes later, they were like, "So what are we doing for dinner?" I'm like, what the hell? But when I thought about it, I'm like, wait a minute, that was like a totally normal shift for us. Yeah. Like everything that happened was normal, except for just, it was a different people on different shifts. Like the shift got shook up. I think there were a bunch of people on vacation. But yeah, I think it was such a cool thing for me to see. Like, yeah, they're still bickering. There's still argument about politics. We're still complaining that so-and-so didn't take the trash out. So I hope that everybody can have that in their own department. I hope that we get there at some point in the fire service for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And there's, if issues do happen, regardless of what it has to do with, maybe something happened with a guy, like 2 guys are fighting, whatever, you have to just be comfortable enough to walk up to that person and handle it yourself professionally. And if it's not working, then go to your officer. You have to be able to trust that your officer is going to handle the situation for you, because like, some people don't like calling it a family, whatever you want to call it. Like we call ourselves a family. We're there to our lives together. You have to live with these people. And like my department's small. So even if we transferred shifts, like we're still going to see them. You have to be able to work with people. You cannot enter the fire service and think that this is a job that does not include working with people, because it includes working with people way more than any other job does. So you have to be willing to just adapt, I guess, and be accepting of other cultures and other people, and just learn from each other, I guess.
So we've covered a ton. Like we went from building construction to like, I'm trying to figure out what to say, and you're just like, I'm gonna be opinionated for both of us. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Like we were talking about the female in the fire service thing. I got it.
Yeah. No, and that's but I love the fact that you are opinionated and you do have a voice, and I love it. And it is, I know in this in this Q&A session, there's probably 17 different things that I counted off in the back of my head where I'm like, somebody's going to learn from this. Somebody's going to learn from that. Somebody's going to pick up on this. Somebody's going to have a question about that. So I love it. And I can't thank you enough for taking time to, it's 8 o'clock here, 9 o'clock your time, we're just kind of hanging out, and I appreciate you kind of pushing that limit and pushing that forward for everybody in the fire service. Cause I don't know who's going to watch this. I mean, we might get 10 views. We might get like 1,000 views. I don't know. Well,
I appreciate you thinking of me. It's always good to connect with other people, and I'll talk fire any day of the week. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll definitely have you back on again. I'm sure that there's going to be other questions. I will never ask you another question about females in the fire service. I promise.
Perfect. I always say now, I'm like, if you want to know my opinion, I'll direct you to the article. Like, right. I'm not trying to be arrogant when I say that, but I've said it there. Like, there's nothing else I could say that I haven't already summed up. So
yeah, and your article, just real quick, I just want to say this real quick. Like, your article was amazing, and it was so well written, and it was so well said. And I think there were definitely people on both sides of the spectrum. But when I read it, I was just like, yeah, like that's great. Like that's so cool to hear someone in your position, in your spot, open up, because you had a different viewpoint that maybe people hadn't thought about. Mm-hmm. So it was really, really cool. I really
like you said, it took both sides. There was people that loved it and there was people that hated it, but it opened up some amazing conversations, and it got people to think. And like, that's all I really wanted, was maybe to take a second and think before you speak, and maybe think about what the culture of our fire service is moving forward. And I learned a lot from people after that. And I hope that some people maybe took a different opinion after it too. And that's all I really wanted, is why I shared it. So
I think you did. I think you hit that. You definitely accomplished it. But yeah, like I said, I will definitely have you back on. I'm looking forward to seeing what your next steps are. You know, you're definitely into the building construction thing, and you know, I wish you all the best of luck. So
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
all right, well, guys, if you have any questions, you can definitely. Do you have like a website or a Facebook page or anything that you have to plug?
So I'm on Instagram and Twitter, both Lex Shady 516, and then all the articles that I've written with Tobin on building construction, and then like that article there is on my blog. It's just the shadyfirefighter.com. So
Awesome. Okay, so you guys can follow her there. And as always, if you guys have any more questions, we're constantly getting questions sent in. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and email david@valorfiretraining.com. Until the next time we talk, take care, be safe, wash your hands and wear your mask, and we'll talk to you soon.